Well, next, let me introduce Rupert, who is, well, like I mentioned, who support us for the 2020 Hurun Innovation Awards. And it's our pleasure to invite him to come to give us a keynote as well for today's event. And so a little bit introduction about him. So he is the founder of Hurun Report. This is the most trusted ranking of the wealthiest individuals in China. And he is very influential around the globe as well. So let me invite him on the stage.
Hello, Bob, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Lovely,
Good.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I really enjoyed Steve's presentation just then. I think it's very inspiring to be able to listen to somebody who's clearly, sort of living the dream of an entrepreneur and going about sort of with lofty ambitions to change the way we live and the way we are sort of creating things. So no, it was really inspiring that. I'll give a quick introduction as to what I am. I'm a Brit. I've been living in Shanghai and Oxford, between these two places for the last sort of 20 years, but predominantly in China. And my role has always been sort of considered to promote entrepreneurship. My role has been always to promote entrepreneurship through lists and research. So we started out by trying to tell the story of modern China, or I started out by trying to tell the story of modern China, but through the eyes of a rich list. Now, it was very controversial at the time almost, because how can in communist China there be a whole lot of sort of super successful capitalists? It sort of doesn't quite make sense. And anyway, I launched the first list back in '99, and then I launched again in China the following year, actually. So the first list went out in America, and then the second list came out in China. And it really sort of revolutionized, I think, or it certainly added to the debate, if you want to be a bit more quiet about it. It added to the debate about what is the role of wealth creation. And again, you can't say more than just what Steve just said, which is, wealth creation is put an idea out there and then follow it, and then go for it. And, so it was very controversial in the early days. So a lot of people, were quite anti the idea of a wealth tracker or wealth rankings in China back in the early 2000s. And from the people on the list itself, and we sort of overcame most of those hurdles. And we're now considered, at least in China and in India, and then across the world, more and more, as being sort of one of the sort of leading, rich list providers, but really telling the story of these economies and encouraging a lot of young entrepreneurs to grow up into big entrepreneurs, if you like that. So the way I thought I'd talk about it today is twofold. One is I'd give you a quick idea as to what the current status in the world is on the most successful entrepreneurs, especially in the post-COVID world. And then secondly, I thought I'd talk you a little bit through the Hurun Global Unicorn Index, because we just put that out earlier this month. And I think there's a lot of key learnings, especially it dovetails very nicely with what Steve was just telling us a couple of minutes ago. So first of all, I'm just going to speak it rather than, I haven't got a presentation, but a lot of this data is online anyway. So if we look at what's happened post-COVID, so in the first 2 months, so if we assume that COVID started, at least as far as the economy is concerned, at the end of January. So in the first 2 months, the top 100 most successful entrepreneurs on the planet, they lost almost, I think, a huge number, $400 billion of value was destroyed in the first 2 months. And that caused a lot of the markets to shake up, and was very upsetting for a lot of people. However, 2 months later, pretty much all that money had come back again. It just comes straight back in a V shape. And I think we were 1% down. By the end of May, the top 100 wealth creators in the world were about 1% down on where they'd been at the end of January. And yes, there'd been a few losers. So, sort of Warren Buffett and Bernard Arnault from LVMH, they both lost about 20 billion US dollars. They were still individually down very substantially. But if you look at sort of some of the most successful ones, well, we all know how much Jeff Bezos has added. He added about exactly what Warren Buffett lost, which is 20 billion. And then there are a few quite significant changes coming out of China. So we saw another e-commerce platform, Pinduoduo, coming out of China. He was the second largest wealth creator in the world by the end of May for this year, and he was also up just under 20 billion US dollars. Elon Musk, well, Steve's already mentioned, and at that point he'd only been up 10 billion US dollars, but obviously since then he's gone up substantially since. He's almost doubled since. So that was the second 2-month period, and I've put them into 2-month periods. And the third 2-month period has been very curious. And I think it's exactly what Steve is saying, is that sometimes we're in a big crisis. We've seen this crisis, push everybody down and lose confidence. Then suddenly, okay, hang fire, don't bet against these super wealth creators too easily. So, okay, we came back. But since the 1st of June through to where we are today, we've suddenly seen the trends, or the mega trends, if you like, be just accelerated enormously. And that's something that I think has been a real shock to a lot of people's systems. And again, Elon Musk is one of those people. Zoom from Eric Yuan is another one of those people. Zoom, at the beginning of the year, I think he was like 3 billion US dollars. As of today, I haven't seen exact numbers, but at the end of 6 months, he was like 13 billion US dollars, which pushed him pretty much into the top 100 in the world. So what we've seen is this acceleration of wealth creation in a direction in these new economies. And I'll move on to the global unicorn index shortly. But it takes me to my first key point, is that the speed of wealth creation today is such that we've never seen in the history of the world. We're at the time of the fourth industrial revolution. You've got all these new technologies, like electric cars being considered to be the future, or e-commerce being considered to be the future, and so on. And what's happening is, how do you build yourself a platform with good people around you and establish yourself with a proper business in this field? You've suddenly found that the value that you created has gone up exponentially. And this is something that people are finding very hard to get their heads around, because all these traditional sectors, and we've seen them a lot in the US, in the UK, and around the rest of the world, have been bleeding and suffering significantly. And yet the economy has sort of, as far as the stock market is concerned, it's sort of appeared to have never been better. And that's because suddenly people have accelerated their need to sort of invest and put all their attentions into the future. And that's what COVID has done, I think. And COVID-19 has really accelerated the wealth creation into the new era, into these new industries. There are a few oddities, and I just want to point them out, just for some people would be bemused by this. So, okay, you've seen in the last, the biggest wealth creators, I said, has been e-commerce, Jeff Bezos, and then Pinduoduo's Huang Zhen's has been 2 of them. Obviously, you've got people who make ventilators and medical equipment. This guy in China called Xu Han, he added also not quite 10 billion, just under 10 billion US dollars in the last 4 or 5 months. But then you've got some other weird ones, and I just throw these out because you've got a pig farmer in China. There's a soy sauce producer in China. So the pig farmer is from deepest, darkest Hunan province. And there's been a pork price increase. It was accelerated during COVID, and he's added also investment of 10 billion US dollars. Who would have thought that? Or a soy sauce producer, which is like sort of a really traditional industry, but suddenly their value has been considered to be significantly more. Investors sort of flock to it. It's like a safe haven almost. And again, the founder of this particular business, which is called Haitian. And I mentioned these Chinese examples because these are worldwide examples. They're amongst the top 5 or top 10 biggest wealth creators since COVID. So, everybody's talking about tech, but also please don't forget there's a pig farm, a couple of pig farms out there, and there's a soy sauce provider out there who created about as much wealth as any tech guy around. So my point on this one is the speed of wealth creation for the right direction has never been as high as we've seen here. Now, the second thing I was going to talk about today is very closely linked to our Innovation Outstanding Contribution Awards that we're going to be doing with Decode later in the year. And that's our Hurun Global Unicorn Index. So we just put this out, as I said, earlier on this month. We define a unicorn. It is worth defining it because there's a lot of sort of conflicting definitions out there. As a business that was set up, a startup set up in the 2000s, that's hit $1 billion US valuation, and that's not yet public. So it's just those three things that we use to define it. And this is where, you know, the whole trade war suddenly becomes really apparent. And I say this because 80% of the world's known unicorns are either based in the US or China. So they're almost neck and neck. So, I mean, the US at our latest count has got 233, China's got 227. So, I mean, they're pretty much, I mean, there's some that we've missed and so on. So they're about the same, they're neck and neck. So what that means is that China's got 20% of the world's population, the US got roughly 5% of the world's population. So that means that 25% of the world's population have 80% of the most exciting dynamic companies that are sort of indicators of the future direction of the world. And 80%, so I mean, I'm a Brit and I'm a so therefore it makes me non-Chinese, non-US. I represent 60% of the global GDP as a non-Chinese and non-US. And I represent 75% of the world's of non-China and non-US population. And yet we've only got 20% of the world's unicorns. It's absolutely staggering. And that's because these unicorns are creating an ecosystem of top talent, top investors, and of course, strong big market. So you put those three things together and you've got, that's sort of the core for creating these unicorns. Now, I break it down a little bit further because although I know that we're talking in the US today, and if you break down to which countries outside the US and China, well, you would have expected India to be number 3. Funny enough, it's not. It's the UK. So the UK came third with 24, and it dominated Europe. So it had like 40% of all known European unicorns. So I thought it was quite interesting. India was 4th with 21. But again, what was curious about India is that although we found 21 with headquartered in India, there were another 40 unicorns around the world, predominantly in Silicon Valley, that were founded or co-founded, I should say, by an Indian. So, you know, Indians underweight in terms of the representation on the unicorn list because there's 60 unicorns co-founded by Indians around the world, just that a lot of Indians choose to actually build their business in the US rather than in India for various reasons. Then you've got South Korea, Germany, Brazil, Israel, and so on and so forth. So that was one point. Another point that I think is very, very, we need to be very aware of is let's break this down into cities. And so as a region, the world's #1 still for unicorn creation is the Bay Area. But we know the Bay is pretty big. If you break it down into city, however, it's a different story. 9 out of the 10 unicorn capitals of the world are either in China or the US. And this is really, really relevant because as I talk about this ecosystem of investors, good marketplace, so obviously the US and China, we put that to one side, they got the market, and then raw talent. These unicorns feeding other unicorns. It's, you know, I'm in Shanghai today. Everybody's looking at Ant Financial, which is expected to go IPO shortly. And it's the talk of the town. Everybody's talking about Ant Financial. The latest round is $150 billion US super unicorn. It was founded back in 2004 or something. Spun out, I should say, out of Alibaba. Everybody's looking at Ant. And you go to any meeting, we're talking about it. It's potentially going to go 200, maybe 300 billion. There's a whole lot of rumors out there. But more importantly, is that there's a lot of people looking at the founders who, or amongst the early talent that's coming out of Ant, who've been brought up, if you like, in the last 10 years in the Ant environment, and are now going to come into some money after the IPO, and will then start creating new businesses, spinning out new businesses. And that's where the ecosystem is so critically important. So here, if you look at my city, far and away the unicorn capital of the world is actually Beijing. So we found 93 unicorns based in Beijing. San Francisco was second, was 68. So you're looking at 90 plus and just under 70. So a significant margin here in difference. And then Shanghai, New York, and Shenzhen. Now, so number 1, 2, and 3 were clearly Beijing, San Francisco, Shanghai. And then after that, and then New York, and then you had Shenzhen and Hangzhou and various others. Funny enough, the only non-US or China city in the top 10 was London, which obviously as a Brit makes me proud as well. And if you break down a little bit more into in the US, so San Francisco, I say, is the number 1 unicorn city. It's the city of the city capital, the unicorn capital of the US, followed by with 68 that we know of, followed by New York with 33, Palo Alto with 12, Redmond City with 10, and now we're getting into single digits. You then got Boston, Mountain View, Sunnyvale, Santa Monica, and San Mateo, and so on and so forth. So, but this is absolutely critical, because if you're looking at creating the next unicorn, you basically want to be close to a lot of the unicorns that have already been built. Give you another example of a unicorn that just went public a couple of days ago, actually in the US. It's a Chinese unicorn. They do e-cars, so they're another sort of Tesla competitor, if you like. But they produce a minuscule amount of e-cars, like thousands per year. It's called XPeng, and yet they just went on their first day of valuation to, I think it's about 12 to 30, just over $10 billion US. $10 billion US puts them at like a third of the market value of the likes of sort of BMW and Mercedes, which are roughly around 50 billion, possibly a bit more. I haven't looked at it very recently. But what I mean is that this is a startup e-vehicle company. The guy sold a business, that's Mr. He Xiaopeng, sold a business. He started the business, sold it to Alibaba, went to work for Alibaba, decided that he wanted to set up a new business, having been in the Alibaba system for a while, got investment from Alibaba amongst others, and has gone on to build this thing. And this is what I mean by the ecosystem. So he's still in his 30s. He's got a first $10 billion business under. He just listed this week, and all I can say, this entrepreneurship is incredibly infectious. You feel you want to be with these people and say, you know what, I'm going to just throw everything what I'm doing myself and just join them. That's sort of the feeling that you have. And I'm feeling it not every day, but every other day here in China. I've been meeting entrepreneurs quite a lot over the last sort of 3-4 weeks, almost 1 or 2 a day. And all you can say is it's infectious. This entrepreneurship spirit is infectious, and it makes you want to put your dreams bigger. It makes you want to, go and talk to that investor who really knows about making that particular dream come true. And if he buys into your idea, then so be it. So we're talking about the US-China trade war. I think one of the things that was the reasons that it's so, I think the trade war is happening is pretty much visible here on our global unicorn index. And I'll share that with Bob, and perhaps Bob, you can share it with some of the other participants shortly following this. Again, just worth making my final comment, because I realize my time's coming up, is if you look at which sectors are being disrupted here, it's the financial services sector and retail sector. So they're the two biggies. So financial services are being disrupted by all these fintech, the likes of and financial being the biggest disruptor, payment disruptor, and also a whole lot of sort of wealth management and other products that typically a bank would do. So that's the fintech has been, the unicorns are going for the fintech more than anybody else, any other industry. Sorry, they're going to disrupt financial services more than any other industry. And then the second one, of course, is retail, and we've seen that with all these new unicorns coming up coming up. And I just say here again, this is what I find very curious. You would have thought that Amazon, and in China, the Alibaba group, so Taobao, you would have thought they'd wrapped up e-commerce by now. And yet when we look at the unicorns coming through, the ones that are not yet public, there's more doing e-commerce than anything else. So e-commerce is absolutely still full of opportunities. So yeah, I just make that point. And you, again, just to use an example of a company, again, here in China, and I'm using China examples more because they are world examples. They're not just an example that you mentioned in China. These are an example that, frankly speaking, anybody in the world should be aware of. So in China, you've got, in e-commerce, you've got Taobao on the one side, which is Alibaba Group, and then you have Jingdong or JD on the other side. And between them, they pretty much wrapped up the whole e-commerce sector. Right? Wrong. Because Pinduoduo came up. PDD, when it's gone IPO in the US, actually, recently, it's only been around for 7 years. The founder of Pinduoduo actually done a couple of businesses before, but they weren't that big. He shot up to, what, $10 billion US in the space of a year. He created more wealth than anybody in the history of the world at that point. His speed of wealth creation, to sort of first 10 billion and then 20 billion and then 30 billion US dollars, was faster than anybody from a standing start in the history of the world. And that's something that I find remarkable, because he did it in e-commerce, which actually you'd have thought that Taobao and JD had wrapped it up, but no, he came through, and at one stage, he was competing with Jack Ma for richest man in China, just like a month ago. And on the 2 days before he was going to just about overtake him, Jack Ma that was, or Pony Ma, the 2 days before this was going to happen, he suddenly gave away 10% of his stock, or 12% of his stock, and to some of his staff and to charity and various other things. So he didn't actually ever get to number one in China. So those, yeah. So I'm going to stop here because my time's come up. But my key messages are this: is that we've never seen wealth being created at this rate in the history of the world. It's now everybody's got good teams, and if you're in the right direction, the wealth creation is faster than ever before, and especially post-COVID, when suddenly people have realized, right, this is what the future looks like. And so we need to go all into the future. And then the second thing is this spirit of entrepreneurship, I think, is incredibly infectious. I was with a unicorn founder a couple of nights ago. He was so on fire. And I know this is the same anywhere in the world, but he's so on fire. You just can't not be infected by his entrepreneurship spirit. And you just sort of, I come out of it that evening and I'm thinking to myself, my brain's running round and round, trying to sort of get an idea that this is, what can I do to really do something as amazing as this? Obviously, then you go to sleep, you wake up, and you're still the same person. But yeah, it's infectious, and I think anybody who comes into touch with these people, as we just saw with Steve, you can just feel the energy pulsating out of him, and so I think that's why with Decode we're going to be doing these innovation outstanding contribution awards. We're trying to dig up and encourage, I suppose, some of the top innovators and entrepreneurs in the US and around the world. So thank you very much, Bob, and also Richard, who's probably watching and sitting behind here, for the kind invitation today. Really pleased to be here. And yeah, shout if you need anything from my side. It's absolutely fascinating what's going on in the world. It's raw capitalism at its rawest now. And final word is, I reckon in about 150 years' time, maybe our children's children will be looking back, reading or writing about the history of entrepreneurship and big business. The first generation will be Rockefeller, Carnegie, JP Morgan. But they will have been quite small. The real generation of entrepreneurs are the people that we are around today. They are the Jeff Bezoses, the Bill Gates possibly, and although he might actually also end up being relatively small compared to the likes of Elon Musk. If Elon Musk goes on doing what he's doing, he's going to dwarf what Bill Gates has done today. And everybody thinks already that Bill Gates was the biggest entrepreneur in the world. So we are living in probably one of the most exciting times in the history of the world with entrepreneurship. So go for it. It's my simple answer, simple statement. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a very exciting keynote, and I already see a lot of great response from the chat room. I already have, I see a lot of questions, but sadly we are already over time. So we're going to move to next, but thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you.